But welcome to everyone. It's time for me to have a glass of water.
While you're doing that, I want to mention that you may notice that one of the four musketeers is missing. And
upgraded today.
Yeah. So this time Richard made it, but Michael didn't. So
is it his 85th birthday too?
Yes,
it is Michael's birthday, November 6th.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't want to inundate him with emails like we did with Richard. So if anybody has a suggestion of a prank we can pull, put it in the chat box, and we'll certainly consider.
And we knew that as business started to come back for all of us, that there would be times when we wouldn't all be able to be here, but we're all going to be here who can be here. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Richard Hadden. I'm speaking to you from Jacksonville, Florida, and I want to introduce very quickly my other two colleagues, Jeff Tobe, who is joining us from his home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Sunjay Nath, who is joining us from his new home outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is every other Wednesday, and thank you everybody for joining us. Last week, we talked about the topic of how do you maintain and build a culture in this remote/hybrid workplace that we're seeing so much of. There was no way we could even scratch the surface last week. And so here we are to start again. And we're going to continue to kind of plumb the depths of that, excuse me, of that conversation. What always works best is when we have those of you out there in the audience chiming in the chat, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to ask, first of all, Sunjay and Jeff, what have you heard in the last week or two that you would say is a really cool idea that relates to culture and specifically with respect to the hybrid/remote workplace?
I think there's a lot of my clients are going back to, and I know we're going to talk about this, but some combination of the two now. And, because if they only bring part of their workforce in, they can socially distance, and then they have the other part at home. One of my clients, it's totally voluntary. And it's amazing to me that more people volunteered to stay at home than they did to come to the office. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about that, but that was an aha for me.
That was a surprise, because I'm not at all surprised to hear that. I mean, I'm hearing that from people out there, and I'm wondering, if any of our viewers have anything to chime in on that as well, while Sunjay is answering the question.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, just as an overall pattern, so March hit, and everyone kind of like the world froze, and everyone's like, and I think a lot of people had this thought of, this too shall pass. And so people just froze and things just shut down. And as we've kind of gone through the last 7 months now, I think more and more people are going, you know what? I can't just hold my breath and let this thing pass. It's going to take more than a week or two. And we're 7 months into it, and people are still going maybe a year, maybe two. And so what I'm finding is people have the mind space of, we got to get back to business as usual. And it's not the same as it was, but we're making do. So specifically, personally on the speaking front, March, my entire schedule just dried up, and no one will, absolutely, we're not doing any of this stuff. And now what I'm finding is more and more people are like, okay, we're doing it virtually because we kind of need to. And it's a bit by more necessity than, necessarily planned strategy, but people are just jumping back and going, okay, we're here, we're going. And we'll pick up the pieces as we go. We're committing to it, and we're going to figure it out as need be.
Yeah. I mean, I find that we've always adjusted to whatever the reality was that was there. And at the very beginning, we were clearly in this disruption stage where everybody was like deer in the headlights. Gosh, what are we going to do? This can't last for very long. There was a preeminent scientist on the faculty of Yale, Dr. Christopher Christakis. I think his first name is Christopher. Anyway, Dr. Christakis, he very, very highly respected, and he's been very, very good about providing information about the sociology of the pandemic and what is happening and so forth. But at the very beginning, this guy who knows a lot, he's smarter than any of the three of us probably. And he said, yeah, this could go on as long as 3 months, but before we rag on him too much, nobody else knew that either. And so I think, like Sunjay says, we've had to adjust and to do what we can while keeping each other safe. we've already started talking about this. You're doing some virtual presentations. I'm doing some virtual. I've had a couple of in-person, large rooms, small group, masks, socially distant, and all of that, because people are saying we're going to have to learn how to live with this until it changes significantly.
Just a quick little story about that. You're talking about large rooms, small groups. Personally, I have not actually done any live ones yet. I had 2 live ones booked, and then that week they made them virtual. But a colleague of mine was doing one of these, and I actually want to say it was in June. It was early on, June, maybe July. But large room, small group, socially distanced, 1 person per 6-foot banquet table. And he said, we did it. It was great to be in front of the group, and it was amazing and good energy and well received. And everyone was doing their social distancing, and all was great. And then the CEO got up and said, that was fantastic. Everyone rush the stage, group photo. And everyone took off their masks and did a group photo. And the reason I'm pointing that out, I mean, it's silly and it's funny, because it's so new to everyone. This is not the usual protocol. And right. There are gonna be bumps along the road, and we're gonna make stuff up, and we're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna get it wrong. But eventually we're gonna kind of carve out this nice path where we're gonna find a healthy balance of, is the term we were using last week, the homers versus the, what was the opposite?
Officers. The homers versus the officers. Yeah.
The officers. Policemen then. Okay.
I'm monitoring.
Go ahead,
monitoring the chat box.
I want to say we got a lot of activity there.
I'm not going to read. I'm not going to read everything, but most people are saying that if they're working in some hybrid, they're happy with the way it's working.
Wait, sorry, Jeff.
Closed down, but I'm curious,
Jeff. I've noticed that everyone's writing things to all panelists. If you make a comment in the chat box, please send it to all participants, not only the panelists. Because the panelists, we only see it. From the participants, everyone gets to see it. So
maybe I will go through quickly. I won't read them all, but I do want to say that.
First of all, how are people doing, Jeff? How are people doing on the scale of 1 to 10?
I thought we did that. We did 4s. We have some 9s and 7s all over the board. So,
okay.
And I wanted to mention our attendee from the UK, Brid, mentioned that they've just gone down into lockdown, and Ireland did a full lockdown. Yep. So as of airtime, so things, again, we don't know what's going to happen in the States. Canada, I'm sure, is looking to us to see what's going on. But everybody's saying, given a choice, they would prefer some kind of hybrid. Some people are saying they'd rather stay at home. But I want to mention one. Dave Gibson mentioned that because we have no border restrictions, we can now hire the best from anywhere, not just locally. And I guess he means because we can work internationally now, right? We don't have to have somebody in the office. So my daughter's boyfriend is working remotely from Hawaii and laying on a beach most of the time, I think. So it does offer us that opportunity as well.
Yeah. So I strongly believe that whether we have, regardless of the pandemic, if the pandemic were to lift tomorrow, and I said this last week, but I'll say it again, people have been to the promised land. They have seen what it's like to work from home, and many do like it. So I don't think we're ever going back to what we had. And the problem with that is, and I got a little insight on this last week. I had the opportunity to speak for 3 groups last week in another city. I traveled and all of that. And they were primarily CEOs in the group. They were, again, large room, small group. And we were talking about this whole, almost all of them were in a hybrid situation where they had been mostly work from home, and now people have come back on various terms and on various criteria. And I definitely saw 2 camps in the room, and these are all CEOs of successful businesses. One guy said, and he was a guy, and he said, well, we've got people who are coming back, but you know what? If unless you have some legitimate reason to work from home now, you have an underlying condition, or you live with someone who has an underlying condition, I want to see you back in the office. And if you can't come back in the office, I really question your commitment. And I wonder how committed you are to the organization. And then somebody else said, yeah, I agree. And then when it comes time to be looking at people for development opportunities and promotions, clearly the ones who we have in the office, those will be the ones who get the first consideration, not the people who are choosing to stay at home. And I said to them, I said, well, if that works for you, and if you are able to find a sufficient workforce of a high enough quality who's willing to play under those rules, then it's your business, go for it. I said, but you are paying me to offer my advice and counsel. And I would say that we need to be open to the possibility that as the war for talent heats back up again, as unemployment comes down, and it always does, no matter what kind of economic turmoil we're in, when the war for talent resumes, you may not have that luxury, because people who you really want working for you may say, I've got a lot of options here. And of the options I'm evaluating, these two organizations will allow me to work sometime from home. And if you're not going to allow me to work from home, sorry, find somebody else who's willing to work under those rules. So we really have to look at, it's not just about us anymore. It's about what is the labor supply, and people have seen what it's like to work from home. And I think we're going to have to respond and to provide options where people can do what works best for them, or we're going to cut ourselves off from a really high quality labor supply.
So yeah, Richard, you make a really good point, and that the idea of, if that's what they want to do, that's fine.
Sure.
And we live in an environment where there's enough different philosophies and cultural organizations that, yeah, it can be, because there are people who love the idea of having their water cooler talk and the synergy that goes on by being in face-to-face and in a creative environment and all that stuff. And I want to go out to lunch with them, and I want to go bowling with them on Friday. And there are people that need that. And then there are people who just want the opposite. And it's like, we will meet once a year at our annual staff meeting. Otherwise, we have no contact in person. We can, Skype in, text in, whatever we need to do, and everything in between. But I think what you want to do is be clear to what your true vision is and how that ties into the company philosophy, the organizational culture, and be true to that, and not kind of go, oh, well, Apple did this, so we have to do it. Oh, Google's doing this, we have to do it. So you don't want to chase them. You want to learn from them. You want to look at the best practices. You want to cherry pick, but ultimately be true to what you're calling, what your vision, and what your organization absolutely needs.
Yeah, I want to circle back though to something that Richard said that you kind of glossed over, and I think it's a huge point, and that's about advancement in the organization.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking that out of sight, out of mind. And I'm wondering, and maybe we can't answer this, I'd like to know your feelings about it, but I really believe that the remote workers have a possibility of being passed up for advancement in the organization, depending, again, on the mentality of their leader. I understand that.
Well, they do. But here's what I shared with this group there. Someone said, listen, out of sight, out of mind. If you're not going to be here in the office, and I'm not going to be thinking about you in terms of development promotion. And I said, that may not be the best filter to put on the process.
Right.
The best filter to put on the process is, how can we use this person's talents for the benefit of our organization? And because they're working from home, but may be talented at a level 9, and someone who's working in the office who may be talented at a level 7, it really is cutting our nose off to spite our face if we go with the 7 because we see that person, rather than the 9 because we don't. So it really is a matter with so many things. What's the right
question? The question is, what do you mean by see? Because out of sight, out of mind, I agree. But just because you're working remotely doesn't mean you're out of sight.
That's
because
right.
If you produce top-notch work and you're coming in virtually, and I mean, those are the things that we have to kind of get our heads around. Is out of sight doesn't mean, okay, you're out of sight because you're not here.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're breathing the same air as we are. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I want to bring.
Unfortunately, I can see you guys, so you're inside, even though we're thousands of miles apart.
Yeah, I want to stress 2 of the comments that we got, one from Kelly and one from Catherine, who both bring up the point that isolation is, we can't ignore the mental stress or the mental health of professionals. And I think that we tend to do that because we think we're engaging them, because we have meetings 3 times a week and everything else. But, when they're not in a meeting like this, they're isolated. And my point is, I don't have a suggestion, except that we got to keep that in mind, because I think it's going to be a huge challenge as we go forward.
Ooh, I do have a suggestion.
Good.
So I just in talking with people and in researching and finding out what companies are doing, I found a couple of really cool things that some organizations are doing. So there's a company called Airship. It's a high-tech company. The CEO of that company is a fellow named Trent Koserek. And 2 things that he said. Number one, he said, if one person is remote, everyone is remote. If one person's remote, everyone is remote. It makes a difference in the dynamics. But here's what he did that I thought was really cool. He said that when they had people in the office and they had people working from home. And he noticed when they were having meetings, Zoom meetings just like this, where they had, 10, 15 people on the Zoom screen and all the little boxes. He noticed that the people who were working at home were simply not as engaged in the discussion, in the conversation, as the people who were in the office. So occasionally what he does, not every time, but occasionally when they're having a meeting like that, he'll have everyone call in through Zoom. Even if they're in the office and they're in the next cubicle and they're in the next office to each other, they could be together in one conference room as they had been before, but now they're not. And he says it equalizes that whole dynamic, and people are there, and now everyone is equally engaged. I just thought that was one cool idea, and I would encourage people to give that a try sometime.
Joan brings up a great point. I just want to mention, Joan brings up a great point. We're almost on the edge of discrimination if we're not, if we're not advancing some people over others. So just another thought.
Well, and that's discrimination is putting the wrong filter on the process. Right. When we pass over someone because of some irrelevant quality, as opposed to looking at a relevant quality, that's exactly what we're doing.
I want to point out that organizations have actually worked remotely for years.
Oh yeah.
But not even from the at home, because if I have a business in Toronto and it grows and I decide to open up an office in New York, well, from the Toronto centric head office, the New York people are remote. So whether they're working at the New York office or they're home on Cooper Court, it's still the sort of the same dynamic. So that dynamics have always been there. And if you look at really large organizations that have 500 sites around the world, essentially that's like 500 different remote offices. And so we can look to the paths that have been laid down by organizations that have done this, and how do they engage them? And do you now bring in people yearly or monthly or weekly, either physically, because most people are at home and they need that social interaction that's been brought up here in the chat box, or virtually through Zoom or whatever other technology. So we've been doing this for a while. We just need to now perfect it, and we need to do it on a larger scale.
Let me give you the opposite side of all this too. It occurred to me recently that if you're going into the office, yeah, you may have a social interaction, but guess what? You are always on. You know what I mean? On. Whereas being at home, I'm not always on, and I don't know how that affects productivity.
Does this apply to your clothing as well?
Right, exactly. And you wouldn't be wearing pajama bottoms like that. Oh,
yeah, I don't want to see that.
I wasn't supposed to say that, but I do want to reiterate what Sunjay said earlier. If you're posting in chat, we love your comments. Please make sure that they're to panelists and to the attendees. Some of you are still sending them just to panelists.
Cool. There's another whole issue, and that is school, back to school. And there's, thousands of school districts in North America. I don't know what's happening where you live. I know where I live in Jacksonville, Florida, the schools came back, and then there were spikes, and some of the schools are now closed. They're closing for 2 weeks at a time, and they're coming back, and then they're having to, all of this is going on. Nobody has figured this one out. I don't think. I haven't seen that. And in some places are completely school from home, and some are not having these things. The only thing that I would say, I think it's really, really important to think about, and that is you must never, under any circumstances, ask an employee to choose between their child and their career. The minute you ask someone to choose between the child and the career, it doesn't matter how they choose, you lose simply by asking them to make that choice. And so, and I recognize that it's important for people to be in the office, and sometimes the work cannot be done remotely. And at the same time, right now, and who knows how long this will go on for, but right now we have this very real reality of children studying from home. What do you think? What do our guests think? What do our panelists think?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Just remember, if you ask them to choose, you lose.
The whole thing around schools is, I don't think people realize how intertwined it is to the economy. Because of the whole childcare thing, and for whatever, I don't know what the stats are, but 1 in 3 people works from home, and you get most of your work done when your kid's at school. And so not having kids in school has such a huge economic impact on the entire society that we need to figure that out. So you're right. People, doing the virtual or the hybrid or whatever it is, they're still trying to figure it out. At my kid's school, we had two separate cases about a month apart. And what's impressive, I think, is neither case led to an outbreak. So there was two isolated cases and that's it. And so although it's not necessarily figured out, but it's steps closer towards getting there.
Yeah.
And that's all we're doing. This is a trial and error process. We don't know it. Like, as far as I know, no one on the planet has lived through COVID to explain to us what to do. So we're going to make our mistakes. We're going to, bark up the wrong tree for a bit, but hopefully correct that and move forward. And I think the exact same thing is true about, relating this back to the office and how do you work in these hybrid situations? It's a bit of a guessing game. It's going, hey, this worked when we were in person. This is how we engage, or this is this little silly thing we did and it worked really well. And you try it and tweak it accordingly. Oh, it only hit 60% of what we did last time. So can we maybe try doing it with our left hand and see if that changes the dynamic? Oh, it goes up to 70. Okay. Now we're going to do it with one eye shut and our left hand. And oh, it's up to 85. Okay, that's good enough. Let's move on to the next project. So again, a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of learning from one another, not having to reinvent the wheel. And increased communication. And the really big thing too is the organizations that are winning are the ones that are not holding their cards close. The ones that are willing to share and kind of going, this is what we did, this is how we screwed up, or this is how we hit the home run. You take it and you go that much further with it.
Let me just, I just want to, again, highlight a couple of the chats that we've gotten. And I want to give Lindsay credit because she basically says, in a nutshell, it's been a roller coaster with school. I work harder to get my work done. Having said that, at least I have a peace of mind that my children are safe. And that's what it's all about, right? And I think, don't forget and don't lose sight of the fact that we're talking about culture here, right? And if you're working in a culture that doesn't respect that in family first, then it's time to look for another job as far as I'm concerned, unless you have the power to change the culture.
Yeah.
And the time, not only the power, but the time as well. Yeah. And if a culture, and overall generic comment about culture, I've had organizations in the past call me going, hey, we're a pretty apathetic organization. We've been like that for 30 years. You think you'd come in and speak for an hour and change that? And the answer is no. I mean, it took you 30 years to get there. You're not getting out in an hour. So
one more.
That's a lot of times these changes, they can happen quickly, but they still need time.
And one more just to talk about, I said you're always on when you're at work. And Jack kind of Altshuler gives the other side. He says, when you're the leader, everyone's always watching. So people see subtle clues as to what's important, how to behave, what gets them approval, much more. You're always leading by example. So yes, I was talking more about the employees not having to be always on, but as a leader, you're absolutely always on.
Yeah. I guess it's better, rather than being less on, you have to be more on.
And he's not here today, so
you remember what I said, that when I was speaking with these groups last week, I clearly saw two camps, and there was one camp, and poor thing, I mean, these guys just were not willing to recognize that things have changed. And there was another camp, another group, and they were saying things like, yeah, this has hit us like we've never imagined. We didn't realize that the whole social connectivity thing was as important as it is. And one guy, this guy was brilliant. I know why he's CEO of a successful company. At the end, after listening to everything that everyone had said, he said, the metaphor that occurs to me, he said, this is like a riptide. It's like an undercurrent. And living close to the Atlantic Ocean, we have talk about this all the time. And he says, what happens when you fight against a riptide? You die, you drown. And he said, what I'm learning here is everything is changing and it is more powerful than we are. We need to go with it. And rather than fighting against it and we'll just run out of energy and drop to the bottom and die, rather than doing that, we need to adjust. We need to sync with it. We need to sync SYNC, and we need to go with the flow. And I really thought that was an excellent metaphor. It's not easy to do, but I think it's what we have to do.
Okay, only because we're supposed to challenge each other here.
Yeah.
And what I love is we live in a world where multiple models work. You can have what we would consider to be a horrible culture, but be the perfect fit for the right person. Right? Because if you just want to be told what to do and yelled at and that at 4 o'clock, turn your brain off and go home. There are cultures that exist that way. And not to judge and say it's right or wrong. The question is it right or wrong for you? So the counterpoint to what you just said, I heard someone say this and I thought it was brilliant. He said that when you run away from the storm, you actually stay in the storm longer. Because the storm is chasing you, you're running away, you actually stay in it longer because it engulfs you.
Head on into it.
If you go head on into it, you actually go through it quicker. And so again, depending on what analogy you want to use and what metaphor you want to use, this idea of running away from the work from home is actually going to make things more difficult. The people that have kind of jumped in and said, hey, all right, we're doing it, it's game on. I don't know how we're doing it, but we're doing it, are actually going to get through it much quicker.
Well, I would challenge, Sunjay, that you have just challenged me, because we're saying exactly the same thing. We are saying exactly the same thing. And that's another great metaphor. He said, don't try to swim against the riptide, go parallel to the shore. You're saying don't go away from the storm, run right into it and you'll go through it.
And I have no analogy or metaphor to add. I'm so sorry.
That's because you live inland, so.
I think it's kind of like apple pie, actually. Never mind. Anyway, I think can we ask our viewers to do something and participate in the chat box? What do you want to ask them that we want to know? Oh, I put you.
What famous person does Chef Tobe look like?
I'd love to hear some specific ideas. What have you tried, whether it worked or not? We're looking for ideas. What have you tried that addresses the fact that you've got some people working from home now and some people are back on site? What have you tried to try to address that?
Excellent. Good.
And in the meantime, let me tell you a couple of things that I've heard again that organizations are doing. There was a company who had they found that they had lots of parents of young children. They ended up hiring an out-of-work child's party provider who wasn't having much business with that, hired them to do online virtual story time for the kids. It was a great way to keep the kids. This was during the summer while school was out. But again, using that same kind of idea, what can we do to help build community that will also relieve some of the stress from our workers? Another concept that I heard was, how, I don't know about you, but in our house, we spend a lot of time looking for the remote control for the TV. Somebody said when it comes to the remote workplace, you have no remote control. Get over it. Just understand you don't have control. You have influence, but you don't have control over those people working at home. And the third thing, as I know people are populating the chat box with lots of great ideas. Third thing was, think about when people are working from home and they are accustomed to working in the office, how they used to access data, how they used to get material, how they used to get information. They could pop over to someone's cubicle, they could ask, that they were all there. Everybody was there at the same time, asynchronously. Now we know that people need to access information in a way that may not be as easy to do. And Igloo Software did a survey in which they found out that 43% of remote workers just don't access data that they need because it's too doggone hard to do. So the suggestion is, let's think about what items do people need when they're working remotely, and let's make it easy to access, secure, but easy where people can get that information. They don't all have to be in the same place at the same time.
So just to piggyback on that, I was just chatting with someone from an organization, and she was new to the organization, and she said the onboarding process was horrific. Because it was all virtual. And so traditionally it would be, you don't know how to use the photocopier, you just ask your neighbor. But because you're much more isolated, it's just assumed that you know how to log in your hours. It's assumed you know what software to download and that sort of thing. And so to your point, Richard, the more simple we can make it, and also viewing it from different perspectives, kind of going, okay, pretend you know nothing. And you're sitting in your virtual cubicle by yourself at home, and you're brand new to the organization. What is the priorities? What are the things that you absolutely need to know to be able to do your job effectively? That's the first step. But then the second piece is around, and how do you get that person engaged? So not only are they doing their job, but they're contributing to the organizational culture.
Yeah. So let me read. We've got some great submissions.
I bet we do. Yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Rayfield said set up an all hands meeting on Zoom for both groups. I guess meaning the homers and the officers on Friday morning. And I want to just add, happy birthday, Stephen Rayfield. I know it's your birthday today, so happy birthday. A loyal follower of ours. Connie says, we had a staff meeting lunch at a park. See, yeah.
Oh, great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can still social distance, right? We all brought our camping chairs, sat around, socially distanced. There's only 7 employees at a company, but that's not a bad idea for a big company as well. Bob Friedman, purely social virtual get-togethers. Vicky says we've done Zoom Friday happy hours, not completely successful. Vicky, I'd love to know why you think that it wasn't a success. So if you can add that, that'd be great. Kate said we have very informal team meetings, which allows team members the opportunity to talk about their current issues, less emphasis on top-down communication, more on just listening to each other. What an amazing concept, right, guys? I won't go through all of them, but virtual Halloween costume contest, I love that. We've been sending themed food boxes, example, fajita night, and celebrating national days like Hamburger Day with to-go gift tokens. I love that. Thank you, Robert.
Brilliant idea. Yeah. I heard somebody saying last week that on May the 5th, way back in May, that they had a Cinco de Mayo, virtual Cinco de Mayo, and they sent margarita makings to everybody in their company and let them do that.
Right.
And even doing that on a smaller scale, I heard of an organization where they wanted to just do a one-on-one connection with a boss employee situation. And they Uber Eats the same meal to each other, and they sat down in Zoom, they ate and they talked. And it was like being in person, but they shared the same meal from the same restaurant. It's cute, but people appreciate the gesture.
Jennifer said, and I like this goes back to what you guys were talking about, start a buddy system for new hires.
Yeah.
Very important. So again, it's not that feeling of isolation, and they can help each other. Robert says they're about to start a face mask Halloween creation competition. And lots of other stuff. Let's keep going, and I'll keep going through these.
Okay, and one other idea that I heard last week, again, this was from a CEO, and she said that now she once a week she joins a virtual meeting, which she would never have done before. She would never have just joined a team meeting. I mean, she could have, but she didn't often do that. But now she's joining the team meetings, finding out, getting an invitation, going on that. And she's showing up at meetings where she never would have before. And she's showing up to thank the team for something specific. So don't just show up and say, here I am, you lucky people. But to say, wow, I know what you did. I observed this. I appreciate that. And to thank them for something specific.
Yeah, I want to add one more. We're sending all of our employees a COVID survival kit with hand sanitizer, rockets to help lift you up. I don't know if those are like rockets you can set off outside, and elastic. Oh, we got a Canadian. I'm sorry, an elastic to help you keep it together. Maybe even about resilience. We don't call them elastics in the States, but
rubber bands.
Rubber bands.
Oh, that's rubber bands.
That's an elastic, exactly. But I want to mention something else that Catherine said, which, we've embraced working from home. We're trying to ensure connections to ensure that people know we're thinking of them. Check in with at least 3 of my coworkers just to say hi and how are you doing. I found out so many personal challenges that I wouldn't have known before. And I think it's that we are getting that sense of connection that maybe we didn't have before. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, again, you have to know what the limits are, and it's probably better to let them volunteer the information rather than to pull it out of them. But another thing that I heard along those lines was people are finding out that their bosses, that their CEOs, that their vice presidents, that their directors are real humans, and that they have issues too. And then another piece of advice that I heard was if you're going to have a remote or partially remote workforce, you really need to enable leaders with a remote mindset and have them embrace it rather than tolerate it. Because nobody who's working from home wants to have their situation just tolerated. They will again feel, it's again, we've got all these isms, and now we're going to have locationism. So you're not a real team player unless you're in the office, and we'll tolerate you working. No, we need to embrace that and not have people feel like they are second-class citizens because they're working from home.
Sunjay, you had something to add?
I know I did, and I forgot it because I was too busy listening to Richard. enthralled me. Sure.
He already told us we're not as smart as somebody else. So, I
What else
think
we got?
the last thing I want to just mention is one of these that, again, from Stephen said, we set a time limit for speaking. We use 60 seconds for our group of college instructors, all type A with 6 PhDs. And they said 60 seconds limit. We should try that as one of
that
our
would never work for us, especially if Mike were here.
Yeah, exactly. So I have another question for you guys, if you don't mind. And that the last thing I wrote down, I was thinking about when we were going to talk about this, are distractions. A lot more distractions at home than there are at work. What do you think? I mean, well, I want to start because the reason I even thought of this.
I remember my thought.
Oh, go ahead.
Go be
distracted.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'm actually not even trying to be funny, but I did distract you. You were talking about this idea of sharing personal stuff. It's coming out now more in a virtual setting. I totally disagree. I think it's coming out in a different form. Before, we'd have an informal water cooler talk, and we talk about, I went on a date on Saturday, or I won't believe what little Steven's doing, and we would have those conversations. But because everything is so work focused, we're having a meeting, we're having a Zoom meeting at 9 a.m. and we're talking about the budget. There is no time for that stuff, and so that's why we need to actually. One of some of the ideas we're seeing in the chat box, people saying we actually have to do non-work stuff, because the work stuff actually sticks better when we have the non-work stuff. And in the real world, or it's not the real world, but the in-person world, it was easier to kind of mush it together. In the virtual world, it's too compartmentalized. And so that's one of the things we need to learn, is how to integrate that better. So that was my thought.
I think we've lost a lot of the spontaneity, don't you think? And there's value in that. Yeah. So Jeff, you were asking about distractions. You're asking about distractions. I don't know. We have all worked from home for years. I've worked from my home for 22 years. I used to have an office that I paid rent to. And then once the technology came where it didn't make sense to do that, I moved my office to my home. And people said to me at that time, they said, well, Richard, now, of course, this was 1998. It was a little unusual. It was still a little weird to work from home. And people said, well, Richard, aren't you going to be tempted to like do laundry and stuff like that during the middle of the day? To which my wife responded, this man has never been tempted to do laundry a day in his life. He's not going to start now. But part of what I do is my office is in a whole different floor from the rest of the house. It is completely set off. So I think we need to encourage people to have, as much as they can, and I know it's not always possible, a separate workspace where they can truly be at work when they're at work and at home when they're at home.
Lindsay and Annette both say they have more distractions at work than they do at home.
And I've heard the very same thing. Yeah.
Well, they obviously don't have children or pets, I'm sure. But
maybe not.
So,
yes, it does.
Back just with distractions, I don't know if you've seen one of the viral, YouTube videos in the last week or so of the CEO, who is very obviously a authoritarian CEO, and I guess his dog just keeps jumping up on his lap during a call, right? And it just reminded me of the distractions thing, that we're all human, as you said, Richard. So I think that vulnerability that's shining through because of all this is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
we're getting an awful lot of.
I don't know if you guys heard, but earlier I had a Purelator truck and the doorbell rang twice in my background here, and I wasn't sure if I was supposed to go sign for it or not. But those distractions, people are allowing people to be more human.
Yeah.
So if your cat comes and plunks on your lap in the middle of a Zoom call, people don't think twice about it. Before it used to be like, oh, it's so unprofessional. Oh my goodness. And now people are like, yeah, you know what? You're allowed to be human. You're allowed to be human.
Lori, I guess, got a reader post. It says, it takes me less time to throw in a load of laundry than it did to get a cup of coffee at work. And it's one less thing I have to do after work or on the weekend. So it's a great way to look at it.
I don't know if Lori was being funny or not, but I wholeheartedly agree with that. I've worked from home for 26 years. And the idea of throwing in laundry, it's good because you don't want to sit at your desk. You want to stretch your legs. So whether it's loading the dishwasher, unloading the dishwasher, taking out the garbage, all those things to me are a blessing. And exactly from an efficiency standpoint, it's one less thing you need to worry about when you get home. So there are, depending on your personality, you can find more distractions at work or more distractions at home. If you have that talkative neighbor who will not stop talking to you at work, you're going to be really pressed to get work done.
Hey, I've got another idea that some people are using, and it's a technique that's been around for a long time, and we don't have time to explain it. It's called the Pomodoro technique. And if you're familiar with the Pomodoro technique, if you're not, Google it. It is a way to organize your day into 25-minute chunks. It gives yourselves mini deadlines, MINI deadlines. And anyway, Google it, Pomodoro technique. It has been wildly popular as people are now working from home and find a need to be saved from distraction. Check it out, the Pomodoro technique.
Well, we're running out of time, guys. So one last thought, I guess. What, when it comes to working, we're going to get off of this for the next time we're together. But when it comes to working remotely, what's one piece of advice you'd give to everyone who's listening?
Just to know that it's probably not going to ever go back to where we don't have people working remotely. I believe we will always, from now on, now that we've seen what it's like, we will have, as an element of competitive distinction for talent, we will need to offer, as one modality of working, the ability to work from home.
I'd say shoot first, ask questions later. Just kind of jump in and do it and figure it out as you as need be, because a lot of people are in the same situation, and there was a lot of technology, and people are going to be forgiving and understanding.
That's where I was going to go, is you got to do what works for you. And I think there's never been a better time or opportunity to do that than right now, and figure out what works for you and how you can be more productive. I have to tell you that I feel like, and we all work by ourselves, the three of us work by ourselves, we work out of our houses, but if I were in an organization, I would relish this opportunity to be home, because I just feel like I'm more productive than I would be in an office setting.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess it's up to me. I just want to say a couple things. First of all, thank you to everybody today. That was probably the best participation we've had in a long time. I appreciate it. There's still a lot more coming in. We love that. I do want to ask if anybody, if this is your first time with Every Other Wednesday with us, would you please put that in the chat box if this is your first time? Because I want to tell people that you may not know, but every one of these are recorded and they're up on our website at eowednesday.com. So if you missed one, or you think the topic is interesting, go back and listen. We've got some.
Hold on a second. When we say everyone, I don't want to point fingers, but I believe the second episode, someone forgot to push record. I'm just saying.
That's true. That's true. So most of them are there. And look at that. We've got a lot of first timers. And I don't know about you guys, but I'd recommend you go listen to Crystal Washington's, when she was our guest host, the Everything Culture from FedEx International is very interesting. And that's my segue into saying I'm very excited, because not next meeting, but in a few meetings, which would be December 2nd, we are having an extra special guest. Richard, do you want to mention her? And
Lenora Billings Harris, CSP, CPAE.
Yeah, and who is a friend of all of ours, but she is focused and has been her entire career on diversity and inclusion. So Lenora is going to join us as our guest host. So stay tuned for that. What have I missed? Oh, next time that we're together is November the 4th. And the topic's going to be driving a high-performance Porsche. Oh, no, I mean, driving a high-performance culture. I knew it was something like that, right? Yeah, and so I think we'll have some fun with that. And I do want to mention, finally, that don't forget we're having a 2-day retreat. You'll get the 4 of us and a lot more. You won't just be stuck with us. We're going to talk about all things culture. We'll bring you more information about guest speakers and topics. But that's January 21st and 22nd. Mark your calendars. And any last words, guys?
We're out of time. We're out.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
See you every other Wednesday. Bye.